Good evening. This is a special meeting of the Planning and Development Committee. Alderman Tennant is not here, so I will chair in his place tonight. We have a quorum, and we have one item for discussion tonight, and we will begin with a presentation from staff.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Mark Munzer, Director of Community Development. This presentation will be given by Mr. Latinovich, the Planning and Zoning Administrator. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Community and Economic Development staff who put the memo and presentation together merely as a potential starting point for a conversation regarding to what we're calling the North Downtown Planning Area, so the area just north of where the current downtown plan ends. So I will turn it over to Demir, and then we will gladly take your questions and have discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Holmes, members of the committee, Director Munzer. Demir Latinovich, Planning and Zoning Administrator for the city. So what we want to talk about tonight is provide a brief overview of the downtown plan from 2009. We're going to look at some of the properties with development potential. We're also going to dive into the actual North Downtown planning effort that we've done so far. We'll look at the Northwestern University Housing Master Plan. We'll look at the transit data and census data for the last 10 years, and then we'll provide some overview for the next steps and the recommendations moving forward. So how do we get here? As you probably recall, we had a project, proposed plan development at 831 Emerson Street that is located just north of the downtown area, the current downtown boundary, which is Emerson Street. The proposal called for mixed-use, multi-family development that was sort of targeted to students. It was a 12-story building with 267 units on site. The development was denied primarily because of the concern about the scale of the development, the height, the fact that it was outside of the downtown boundary, but it reflected more of the scale of the developments in the downtown. So the committee recommended taking a look at the framework and sort of the planning effort north of the downtown. So the last time there was a planning exercise done in this area was in 2009. Actually, 2 years prior to that, it was adopted in February of 2009 as the downtown plan. This map really shows the basis and the context for the downtown plan. The plan centered around the train stations, the Davis Street Station, and the Metra and CTA, and then defined the quarter-mile radius around the stations, which is basically a 5-minute walk to the stations. So that's how the downtown boundary was developed, and it became Emerson on the north, along with Clark and Elgin, and then Ridge on the west, Emerson or Lake Street to the south, and then primarily Hinman on the east. This map also shows the sites that at that time were identified as those with development potential, and those are outlined in tan color. There were two main recommendations basically that came out of the downtown plan. The first one was that the plan identified 13 sub-areas that essentially were differentiated between the downtown core, the downtown transitional areas on the edges, and then the three downtown traditional areas. That one was centered along Davis Street west of the tracks, identified as K, one along Sherman Avenue just north of Church, and then the last one is along Davis between Orrington and Chicago Avenue. So the downtown core was seen as sort of having the highest density in the core of the downtown area, which is the big letter I, and then these on the outskirts were the transitional sub-areas that were seen as sort of an overview between the downtown and the outside frames. Now, the plan did call for the development framework and just looked at the heights of potential developments in this area and sort of assigned what it felt was an appropriate development context at that time. And it also looked at the bonuses for those for the developments that if a project provides public benefits, then it would be allowed to go higher. The other sort of big recommendation from the plan was the development of a new zoning code for the downtown area, the form-based code. And The form-based code, however, was not adopted. The form-based code was really articulated and really defined all these development regulations that came out through the plan, and the intent was to replace the existing zoning regulations downtown. Now, the form-based code is a little bit different than your traditional zoning ordinance that looks into separating uses between different districts. The form-based code is about defining physical form for the benefit of the public spaces that those buildings define. However, as I mentioned, that was not adopted. So what we do have is the downtown plan that we use as a guideline on a daily basis, especially as we consider these plan developments. So this is the boundary of the downtown plan. And then the areas in black are what today is identified as properties with potential for development. They're either underutilized, or we've heard from developers, they've expressed interest in developing some of these properties. The properties that are highlighted in darker color are those that have been approved, or there's a development in the pipeline. So 1815 Ridge, 1571 Maple, Chicago and Davis, 1515 Chicago, Hyatt House. So those are the projects that have been approved or in the pipeline right now. The other ones obviously are not. And what's interesting is that we've identified some of these potential development sites just outside north of the current downtown boundary. So, as I mentioned, the form-based code was not adopted, so what we have is the current zoning ordinance, and as you're probably familiar, the zoning ordinance has 4 downtown districts that define the height for the downtown developments anywhere between 42 feet on the fringes in the D1 district to all the way up to 220 feet in height for the downtown core with site development allowances. So when we looked at what we had in the downtown plan with these different sub-areas, and then when we looked at the potential for the development that's just outside of the downtown area, it just became clear and evident that there's a need for one of these sub-areas to stretch across Emerson Street, or that there may be a need for a new sub-area that would encompass these areas that are prone to potential future development. Now, going back into, what we looked at is, various aspects, what would have any effect on the development of these areas. And obviously, whatever Northwestern does has large impact on development framework in this area. So we looked at the Northwestern University's housing master plan. This was started in fall of 2013, and it's sort of a response to their requirement that starting in fall of 2017, all freshmen and sophomores will be required to live on campus. But based on our analysis, what it really told us is that off-campus student housing will remain unchanged, that demand for off-campus housing will remain the same. They do plan on having 5 new residence halls. One of those is 560 Lincoln, pictured in here. And they're going to renovate some of the other residence halls. But in terms of the number of beds on campus, they expect to have approximately 4,047, and then 10 years from now, about 4,500. So a small increase that could potentially be offset by a slight increase in the enrollment, even though their goal is to have the enrollment relatively flat. So that breakdown of total enrollment, that's 11,875 total students on Evanston campus, with 8,278 undergraduates and 3,597 graduates. That's the number that we received since the memo was finalized. The numbers in the memo that you have is a little bit different. We anticipate a little bit more than what it seems to be. So the bottom line is that in terms of all of their efforts on campus housing, that's going to stay relatively flat, and then demand for off-campus housing should be the same. Then we looked at the transit ridership data, and transit ridership is growing. In the last 10 years, the ridership on the purple line has gone up by 9.5%. The ridership on the Metra line has also increased, and the boardings at the Davis Street station went up 11.6%. Now, what's interesting to see here is that the ridership on the Foster Street station is actually higher than that at Noyes.
Can you hold 1 second? Alderman Fisk has a question.
I'm sorry, Demir, to interrupt you. Can you go back to the previous slide? Do we know anything about the students living off campus, where they're living, and if there is a interest in the off-campus population to live closer to campus? Do we know anything at all about that?
At this point, we haven't started a full conversation with their housing office. We've been really having a hard time kind of identifying exactly how many students they have on Evanston campus, because there's always a number in terms of total enrollment, Evanston downtown. So at this point, to this date, we've been able only to identify how many of them will have to be on campus. We haven't had a full conversation with them in terms of where really do they want to be, downtown Evanston or in more close proximity to that.
If I may, Alderman Fisk, that would definitely be part, if we were to decide to move forward, that is obviously a key question, as to if those students are residing in Evanston or possibly, the north side of Chicago.
So back to the transit ridership, what I was going to mention is that what we've seen is that the Foster Street Station ridership numbers are significantly higher from what were in 2005, 38.3% overall increase. And what's interesting is that the weekend ridership has seen a larger increase than that on the weekdays, which means that those are leisure activity, rides that residents in that area are taking, which means that they probably do not own vehicles either. And as even on the Davis Street stop, the overall increase has been seen by 5.6%. Now, this translates into the census data, which we've looked at. We've looked at a couple of items here that what really matters to us when we see development proposals in terms of reduced parking counts, the type of development, apartments versus condos. And we looked at the two transit or census tracts, 8093, which represents the area for the north downtown, just west of Sherman, and then also 8094, which is basically the core of the downtown area. And then we kind of compare that to the rest of the city of Evanston. And what we've really seen is that this is a different demographic that lives in this area. It's very similar to that of downtown, and there are fewer cars owned by these households. And in fact, these are primarily renters more so than the homeowners. So as you can see, the type of household in this area is more of a non-family, traditional type households, primarily roommates or whatnot. We've seen the housing occupancy, as I mentioned, primarily renter occupied, which is even more so than in the downtown area, just over 73%, whereas in the downtown it's about 63.2%. And then the vehicle ownership, this is a big one that we always keep in mind as we see these developments come in and they request reduction in parking requirements. There's almost a third of households in the area north of downtown that do not have a vehicle. Now, that's not to say that some of the other households that have, 3 tenants, that every single one of them has a car. But ultimately, these numbers are what they are, and this is census data. So all these things are taken into effect when we look at the developments. So just to wrap it up, based on our analysis so far, our recommendation is that the downtown plan be amended to add one additional sub-area north of Emerson Streets for the north downtown area. The planning process could include 2 community meetings. We can have 1 informational meeting where we would gather additional information from community members. We would provide additional information to them based on some more research. And then the second meeting could be a sort of a community workshop or a charrette style where we would really dive into the actual development framework and seek input from the residents in terms of the context and the scale of developments that they may want to see north of Emerson Street. And then we can kind of combine findings from those 2 meetings with some additional analysis of the potential development sites. We can do a market analysis study. We can identify funding options if necessary in that area. And then we can come back to the committee in July of this year with some of the additional findings that we have. And then, down the road, sort of a second step of this whole update would be to do a more comprehensive update to the downtown plan, where we would look more at potential update to all the other sub areas and maybe consolidating some of them instead of 13 to maybe consolidate some of them into a lesser number. So with that, I would open up to any questions.
Let's hold our questions. Mark wants to make a comment, and then I would like to have the citizens' comments, and then we can open up for discussion.
Thank you, Alderman Holmes. Thank you, Demir. Thank you again to staff for putting that together. I guess we will continue in my observation to receive development proposals for this area, regardless of if we decide, if all of you decide that a plan is something that is necessary. I do believe that this would give the community an opportunity to speak to developers in a more formal way and provide a development framework for any proposals that we do have coming in. Of course, regardless of how you choose to proceed, we will continue to analyze those as they come in and provide recommendations. But to Demir's point, we do use the downtown plan, the existing downtown plan, even though the form-based code wasn't adopted, we do reference it quite frequently when we're looking at development projects. So this would be of assistance, but we look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Can you get the light, Mark? Yes. All right, we have 3 people who signed up to speak, Jim Ford, Jeannie Lindwall, and John Nickel. If you try to keep your comments to about 3 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, Alderman, thank you. I'm Jim Ford. I live at 2658 Central Park. I am the chair of the Plan Commission, though I'm tonight speaking as an individual commissioner, the commission itself not having looked at this question. I want to encourage you to do this. It's not going to be inexpensive in terms of staff time or the public's time or your time, but I think it is really important that you address development in this area. This is one of those parts of the city in which what Evanston is now and what it is going to become may differ, and I think that needs to be looked at carefully. I'm not going to speak to issues of a potential boundary, for instance. That would be premature. In terms of the process that staff has put forward, I would only say this. I'm not sure that 2 public meetings is sufficient. It seems to me that beginning with a general both information gathering and goal setting meeting, a charrette type workshop approach where you can actually look at development possibilities, planning possibilities, makes sense. I would suggest that there needs to be at least a 3rd stage in that public process where the public has a chance to look at what comes out of the charrette and the staff's analysis of it before it comes to us for review and then to you for review. That's the only comment I would make. I think the staff's analysis of the problem has been well done, and the proposal generally is a good one. I would encourage you very strongly to go forward with this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Jean Lindwall. I began my planning career 40 years ago with the city of Evanston. Much of my career has been spent engaging community residents in a wide variety of neighborhood planning and redevelopment initiatives. I have strong technical skills in tax increment financing and fiscal impact analysis. Given the size of Evanston's total tax base, which is $2.2 billion plus, and the methods used in Illinois for calculating property taxes, the reality is that no amount of new development is going to have a noticeable impact on anyone's property tax bill. Thus, this discussion really needs to be about quality of life that sets the stage for desirable types of new development. Before engaging in a community outreach and engagement effort, I think that there are some basic issues that should be considered and discussed by the Planning and Development Committee and the City Council, which I presume you will be doing this evening. I agree with the need to carefully define the future development framework for this area. The issue at hand is really establishing the appropriate balance between greater density and protection of adjacent existing medium-density neighborhood. Before holding community meetings, I hope you will consider several fundamental questions. First, what is your preferred land use vision for this area? Is the current zoning broken, or can additional density be accommodated under the zoning that's currently in place? How much additional residential growth can or should be accommodated in this area? And finally, who's going to establish the land use and development objectives? And how can residents be assured that their views will be considered when that really hasn't been the case in recent years? Just to kind of engage your thinking, I've got a whole bunch of questions which I'll just kind of hand out. I don't need to go over them now, but I hope you'll consider them.
We can pass them down.
Yes, right.
Great. Okay, thank you. Is that it, Jeannie?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ford?
I keep it short.
Absolutely, you did. Mr. Ford?
He spoke.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nichols.
Yes, I intended to comment about Robert Crown, so is there a different sign-up sheet for the council?
Yes, that's at the council. Yes, that's out there.
Save time on those things.
Okay, not a problem. Okay, that concludes our citizens' comments, and now we open the floor for discussion with the council. Alderman Wilson. You want?
Sure, why don't we have it?
Okay, Alderman Fisk.
Okay,
And then Alderman Wilson.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chairman. First of all, thank you to staff for preparing this information, and thank you to those of you who spoke tonight, but also thank you to the residents of the area. More than 500 of you came out and expressed your concerns to me during the 831 Emerson project about a lack of planning for this site. And the site that I'm thinking about is basically Emerson to Foster, Sherman to Maple. I think that's the area which is probably under the most direct impact for new development. It's also the transition area between downtown and the residential area to the north. And this is, as certainly Alderman Holmes knows, and I know, this is a sensitive area that includes a lot of affordable housing, a lot of renters, a lot of longtime homeowners who have a direct concern about the decisions that are being made that will directly affect their properties. So I think that part of if I don't want to call it a problem, but part of the problem is that we have not kept in step with planning for this area, and I think that is long overdue. And I very much want the residents of this area, as well as all of the residents of Evanston, to be aware that we do have people who come to us on a regular basis asking for development parcels or indicating an interest in development parcels, and we don't have those parcels. I mean, from the time I've been running, I've been very much interested in attracting a new office building in Evanston. I think that really promotes the shopping that we need to increase our sales tax revenue. It's something that is lacking in the downtown. That said, though, there are also existing spaces in the downtown, existing areas that will probably have some turnover in the next 10 to 20 years, and we need to be looking at that as well. So I think some things have changed since we did the downtown plan. Of concern to me is the fact that we never codified the plan. While we passed the downtown plan, it's not been codified in our zoning ordinance, and we need to take a look at that. The opportunity for transit-oriented development and a tie-in of these transit stations, one to another, Foster to Davis, for example, is one that we probably should be looking at. In the area that is of main concern to me, which again is Emerson to Foster, Sherman to Maple, I was concerned at the Plan Commission, and I attended all the meetings at Plan Commission on 831 Emerson, was that there was some confusion on the part of Plan Commissioners of where the downtown actually ended. And I don't know how that came about, why the confusion was there, but I think I'm looking at this also as a help to our commissioners, as well as residents and as well as the council and staff, of really getting a handle on what we want to happen in this particular block. We know, for example, that there from time to time has been interest in development of the Engelhardt Hall site. We have not been in communication with Northwestern University on a formal basis of what their plans are for that site. That's a very large site. And frankly, if you look at the areas along the L stops in Evanston, at every single L stop, you've got a little business district that supports the surrounding community. And the area around Foster was really, it took a setback when Engelhardt was developed. It removed a lot of the existing businesses on the south side of Foster and decimated basically that shopping district. Is that something, for example, that we want to encourage a return to a more vibrant shopping area along there to support the neighborhood? That's something that we should be looking at in terms of planning for this particular block. So I see a lot of questions that we can address by doing this. I don't see it as a process that we should take a lot of time doing, but it's a process that we should do right and take the time that is needed to make sure that we're planning carefully for it, because we're really reaching out now into a neighborhood that has been a traditional residential neighborhood, and we're making it more commercial. So we definitely want to be looking forward. Always looking back is a help because we know how we got to this point. But I encourage my colleagues on the council to consider this. The other point that I will mention is that during the 831 Emerson process, there was what I saw was an assumption that this property was going to be developed for a much higher intense use than it had been before, and that without a conversation, that bothered me. And that is why you saw the response that you did from residents. We always need to do our planning in concert with the residents, especially those that are affected, but those that will be affected also just by a change in potential change in uses north of Emerson. So all of that said, I'm happy to look at this, go forward, figure out what it is that we want to do, what we want to accomplish. And I think the comment that perhaps the existing zoning can accommodate some of the things that we're looking at is probably a very good one, although the zoning is a little bit tricky between the commercial zoning and the residential zoning. Commercial zoning obviously allows storefronts and residential does not. So I think it's time for us to have a conversation about this block, probably a time for us to have a conversation about in Alderman Wilson's ward on the south side of downtown as well, but time for all of us to put our working hats on and figure out where we're going here as a community.
I think we have Alderman Wilson next, but just let me say, following up on something you said, Alderman Fisk, is that I think tonight is the first step in us looking at and having the residents be able to say the kinds of things that they want to see. They may want to see the same kinds of things that we want to see. They may not. And I think it's time for that kind of exchange. So the area that you pointed out, between Sherman, between Emerson and Foster, which is mainly the 5th Ward, some of it is 2nd, that residents have, I think they can see that. It's only when it gets past there and east of Maple that they become concerned because it's residential. Right. So those are the kind of conversations that we need to have, and I think that we will have. The block that I've identified in question is half 5th and half 1st. So we're divided. Well, yeah, on the other side.
Yeah, we're divided by the L tracks.
By the L tracks.
But yeah, most of the residents, a lot of the affected residents are in the 5th Ward in the Fireman's Park neighborhood. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you. And I think, well, one of the concerns I guess I have is, I guess I don't understand what the problem is, beyond just the idea of there being a lack of generally with regard to the planning. We have zoning in place. I think what we're really trying to grapple with are broader concepts, more things like, for example, do we want to have private student housing? That's sort of like, a yes or no kind of issue at this point. Does Northwestern want to support that? Do they think that's a good idea for their students? I don't think our code is sufficiently designed to accommodate those private student housing types of arrangements. So I think that's something that we ought to specifically be looking at. And if that is something that we want to try to foster or promote, what would be the appropriate location for that? It could be anywhere. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in this area, but I think that's just kind of a bigger, broader question than trying to put it into a specific location. With regard to the specific neighborhood, I'm more concerned to hear what the neighbors have to say about what, if anything, is the problem. My impression is that as far as rents are concerned, I think that we are not in a significantly escalating rent situation. I think rents are fairly stable, so I don't think we have a real serious problem with demand. We also have some properties coming online. We also have some things that are kind of, loosely moving around in more of the core downtown area. So I'm just not super clear on what the problem is. I'm troubled by the idea of look at ways for public funding. I'm not sure where that, what the genesis of that is. I'm not interested in any public funding at all. And in fact, I don't even want to pay for the market study. If we're going to pay tens of thousands of dollars for market studies, I can give a really long list of sidewalks that need to be replaced first. So I don't want to put any money into it. I am interested to hear what people in the neighborhood have to say. But that's kind of as far as I'm, willing to kind of step out right now. What's that, neighborhood kind of feedback instead of doing larger design, whole community, market research, any of that kind of stuff. I don't think we're at that point. I think what we really ought to be focusing on are some of those, like I said, do we want the private student housing and or what would that look like? What does it look like in other communities? We've got some good information from Northwestern. What's their reaction going to be to that? Are they going to pass some rule that says, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors have to live there? Yeah, I'm sure they won't, but just to make sure that they're included in those conversations from the inception. What are their intentions with their properties in that neighborhood? I think we ought to be having those conversations. Point blank, ask the question. What are you thinking about doing here? And so we're not guessing. So that's my 35 cents on it.
Okay. Alderman Nguyen and then Alderman Fisk.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I actually do think there is a problem here because we can see that this entire area from the east side of Maple all the way over to Sherman has at some point been part of a development discussion. And if you look at what the zoning is there right now, as Alderman Fisk said, it's really a mixture of R6, C1, U1A, B1. So that actually signifies what's there now, but not necessarily what might be coming in the future. So it doesn't. What this to me sets up is one battle after another over every single parcel about whatever a developer decides to come in and propose, because it may not be one of these zoning districts, but clearly this is a very hot area for potential development. So in my experience in the Third Ward along Chicago Avenue, it's always the areas where there's a boundary, a change in the use from one particular type of use to another, where you get the biggest battles. And so I think to the extent that we can get ahead of these battles and discuss what we want to have there, rather than have to react to what a developer tells us that he or she thinks should be there, would be much, much better. One, it's the community gets to have its say. Two, it's actually frankly better for the developer because then they know what to design and not to come in and have months-long battles. I also think it's really important for us to get ahead of Northwestern. because let's let Northwestern know what we'd like to see there, and have them work with us rather than get into an argument or a battle with Northwestern, rather than have us tell us what they want. Because, I think the community can, and with the staff and with the aldermen, can look at this and say, there's been some changes since '09. We now know that transit-oriented development is really a real thing. And that people don't own cars in the way that they used to, and that we see differences in how people live in terms of size of units they want and the mix of things they want, and the emphasis of these small commercial districts. Our small commercial districts are really thriving throughout Evanston, and I think that's an example of the fact that this is what people like. They want to have sort of a walk-toable, a livable environment. So, I think this is an area that we need to shape, because if we don't shape it, we're going to end up reacting to whatever somebody else wants to come in and tell us is to do. So, I do think that we need to either first meet with the community and hear what they want to do about this, or have the staff look at what are the other areas what have we come up with in other areas that we really view as transitional, because it is right near single-family homes, and we do want to have a step down. You don't want to have an abrupt change from one area to the other, and hear what the community has to say. But I also really do agree with Ms. Lindwall in the sense that none of these properties are going to be a silver bullet for us. And so let's really emphasize the quality of life of Evanston here and find out what the community really wants to do. Because then let's lead the developers in that direction rather than have them tell us. Okay, that's all.
Alderman Fisk, I know you're next. Well, let's take Alderman Rainey and then you, if you don't mind. Okay, Alderman Rainey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For staff, we're a developer to come in tomorrow morning and present a proposal for development of a lot in this area that was more or less by right with perhaps a few variations. Are we talking to those people, or are we telling them there's a moratorium, or we're on hold, or what?
We have had a few inquiries, Alderman Rainey, about this area, and we have said that we were presenting and going to have this conversation with the P&D committee tonight, but that, people are certainly entitled to apply for a development in this interim process.
So your conversation with them about what's coming down the pike, so to speak, is that turning them off? I mean, is your intention really, seriously, to tell them to go away and come back later when we finish with this plan?
I do not believe it is turning them away.
All right, thank you.
Alderman Fisk.
Thank you for that question, Alderman Rainey. I think that's important. I agree with both Alderman Wilson and Alderman Nguyen. I don't want to spend public money on doing a study for this. I think that we have the ability in-house to do this. And but it's just, as Alderman Nguyen said, it's really important to do this right. I mean, this is, we need to get out in front of the development here and say, here's our vision for this block. I think that's what everybody has said. Here's our vision for this block. If we go through the process, then maybe we can lead development along that way. I want to be also very protective of the affordable housing that exists in the Fireman's Park neighborhood. It's entry housing for not only students but families. There's a very strong commitment on the part of the families that live there. And planning is the one thing that we haven't done in the past. And it's time to really take a look at this. I would be happy, Alderman Holmes, to start this out with a joint first fifth ward meeting, if that's what folks want to do, or follow the direction of staff of, public meetings here at the Civic Center, whatever folks want to do in terms of reaching out to the community.
Okay, Alderman Rainey, and then I'll respond.
Alderman Fisk, are you interested in reducing the size of the proposed expanded area to the area of Foster, Emerson, Sherman to Maple?
I personally am.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. What I would be interested from staff is the identifying every single property in that area. Because I keep feeling like this is really we're really talking about 831 Emerson and how we're going to develop that, or how we're going to allow for development there. But otherwise, we're talking about several things. Saving affordable housing, there's a lot of it in that area. Could we, and the lot for Northwestern's parking is in there.
Right.
So, and the graduate student housing is in there?
Yes.
Okay. Could we have a list of all the properties? All the properties, and if it's single family, two flat, et cetera.
You'd like ownership and use?
I'm not so concerned about ownership, but I would like the property defined.
Well, there's also the former Mather nursing facility.
Yes, I was going to say that's there, but also if you're looking at all the way to Noise, which is what I think
she
is
said
proposed.
Foster.
I know what
Okay.
she said, but
All right.
there is a commercial strip on Noise that I think has to be considered. I think that that's an important piece, and how we do that, I don't know. The other commercial pieces would be Foster. And a little bit on Maple. Other than that, there's no other commercial there except for, if you want to call the Symphony, commercial. That would be the nursing home. The east of there is all residential. I was trying to think of a vacant space. I can't think of one off the top of my head. The only one is the Northwestern parking lot that I can think of right now. The other thing is the 831 Emerson.
Well, I don't think it'll be hard for staff to give us.
Oh,
that
no, I don't
list.
think so either, but I'm just
I would
saying.
really like to see it if we're going to confine it to this area. And
Right.
then if we expand it, I'd like to know the properties in the expanded area.
Could I, Madam Chair, Demir, there were some properties on the east side of Sherman between Emerson and Foster that you had
On the east side.
indicated were ripe for development. Is that up there with, yeah,
Right
right,
here?
yeah. Am I misreading that? Is that? On the east side of Sherman? Is that Sherman?
This is Sherman right here.
Okay, all right, never mind. Okay, never
I
mind.
thought it was on the west side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's on the
I was
west
just
side.
confused about
Just
whether
a bit
that line was Sherman
Yeah, that's what I thought, 'cause-
or not. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Any more? I don't see any other lights. Any other comments? Anyone else want to add anything? Oh, Alderman, I'm sorry. Alderman Rivera.
Well, I would just like to echo the comments made by Alderman Nguyen and also Alderman Fisk. I really do think that it's important to be intentional about what we'd like to see in this area rather than react to developers when they come in with what they want. And very important for us to listen to the neighbors in the area as part of this whole process. So just real briefly, I would endorse the idea of our moving ahead with a planning process for this area.
Alderman Nguyen.
Well, I was just going to suggest that if there is interest in making the study area smaller, that we discuss that.
I'm not sure that we're ready for that, if you don't mind.
No, that's
Because I
fine.
think that, we have to look at all of it in terms of the possibility of what could happen at Noise, particularly. I'm assuming that Alderman Fisk would be interested on the north side of Noise, because I'm interested on the south side of Noise, and I do know that there's some potential there now for where the Noise Street Cafe was, that there is some interest there now. So I'm just saying, let's just keep it all there, and I think that I certainly would agree to having a joint meeting, but I hope we'd have a public meeting here at the Civic Center where, we could get all of the input that we can get from, from everyone in terms of what their visions are. So we'd give the staff something more to work with once we got input from the residents. Okay, Alderman Fisk, you want to make another comment?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, great.
So I was envisioning something similar to what we did with the inclusionary housing ordinance. I can't remember if all of you were there. I know a lot of you were there, in terms of maybe that type of format to encourage community participation. There would be a brief presentation by staff, very similar to what we heard tonight. We would certainly augment it with info that you have requested this evening, and then we would probably break into groups, just because that's typically a more manageable way to receive information. We also could use, all the city's social media abilities and whatnot, email, and encourage input that way if that was desired.
Okay. Alderman Fisk and Alderman Wilson.
Thank you again. I want to go on record at this point as saying that I would not in any way support TIFing this area. Part of what started this was in the suggestion of a TIF. I believe it was called the Foster Maple TIF at one point, and I just can't support that, and I hope that we will take that off the table for discussion at the community meetings.
Arlen Wilson.
Thanks. And if it wasn't clear from my comment about the public funding, that's certainly part of what I meant. It's not my ward, but if it were my ward, I think maybe what I would feel more comfortable with is having that the ward meeting, the joint ward meeting, 5th and 1st ward meeting, preceding the larger community meeting, just to kind of get some general guidance on what the direction might look like. That's just my thought. I kind of envisioned more of the the neighborhood input guiding what identifies the quote unquote problems, and then putting that forward as far as what the solutions are.
Well, I think it will be the same. I mean, we're talking about the 5th and the 1st and a little bit of 2nd ward. I'm not going to leave the 2nd ward out. There's a little bit of that as well. So, and that's why I suggested here at the Civic Center. And of course, it'll be an open meeting, so anyone is welcome. But I think that would be our primary audience. So that was my thinking on that. Mr. Munzer, do you have enough to work with?
We do have enough to work with. So we will sit down this week and we will start to jot down a project scope and timeline, working with certainly the impacted alderman, the most impacted alderman, to try and find some initial dates and give us a little bit of time to do some more research. So I would hope that this, could occur sometime in the first half of May, certainly.
Great. Alderman Breathwaite.
Thank you, Alderman Holmes. And I would like to add the 2nd ward to that list if you do decide to move forward with the ward meetings as well. I'm not interested. I'm just saying that to staff in seeing any downtown or any additional downtown TIFs expanded or created.
I was having a conversation with the resident before the meeting started, because the lines are so interesting in terms of how the wards are divided, that people need to take a look. You can go online, look at one of the maps, and see where the wards are. So it's the 5th, 2nd, and 5th that we're primarily, 5th, 2nd, and 1st that we're talking about in this area that would be really west of Sherman and east of Ridge. Okay, so if you look at it like that. And we're talking about Noise to the north and Emerson to the south. So if you look there, you can figure out what we're really talking about, and then we can narrow it in. Okay. All right. If there is nothing else, is there a motion for adjournment?
Second.
It's been moved in second.